Hello, and welcome to our next Life Sciences lesson for grade 12. The topic we are looking at is human reproduction. Now, I hope you have had time to watch the recommended videos that are before this in these series, and you've had time to do those practice questions. Let's imagine you've done all of that, and you think, what next? What can I expect? What is it going to be like in the exam? And in this session, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the types of questions that you could be asked in your final exams. So, let's have a look. First of all, there will always be some easy or straightforward questions. And those are the questions which test to see, have you learnt your work? Are you familiar with the different terms that you need to know? So, let's have a look. For recall, you need to know the parts of the reproductive organs and their functions. And that's basically straight learning work. You need to be able to recognize pictures of the male and female reproductive organs, and you need to be able to label them, and you need to be able to say what each part does in the whole process. You need to know the structure of the testes. That's the testis cut open so that you can see the seminiferous tubules inside it. You also need to know how sperm are formed and where sperm are stored once they have been formed. Then, when we get to the female, and this is more complicated, you have to know what happens in the uterine and the ovarian cycles. And I think this is the part that catches quite a lot of you. We'll look at some examples of that. Then, you also need to know the structure of the placenta, what it looks like, and how it functions. And you should also be able to label the diagram of a fetus inside the uterus. So, let's start having a look at the one that gets all of you a little bit confused. And that is what happens in the ovary. Most pictures look something like this picture here, which is a picture just of the ovary, and all of these stages would not be found in an ovary at one time because these stages take 28 days. And that's where you start. So that's where the follicle starts developing with the ovum to be, or the oocyte inside it. Meiosis occurs because remember the ovum has to be haploid. It has to have half the number of chromosomes, and this is a Graafian follicle. At that stage, the ovum has been formed and it is ready to be released in the process of ovulation. Once ovulation has occurred, the ovum starts on its journey, maybe to be fertilized. But the ovary still controls what happens to it. And the way the ovary controls what happens to it is by producing hormones. In the first half of the cycle, the hormone produced is estrogen, which prepares the uterus for the implantation of a fertilized egg. Once ovulation has occurred, the second part of the cycle, it's controlled by this body, which is the corpus luteum. it produces the hormone progesterone. And the hormones progesterone and estrogen, they are the ovary's way of communicating with the uterus and telling it that there is a chance that a fertilized ovum will be heading into the uterus, and these hormones cause the uterus to start the preparation to be able to feed the embryo if fertilization has occurred. Then you also have to understand what goes on. And the most difficult part of understanding is this relationship between the ovarian and the uterine cycles and the role that hormones play in the coordination of what is happening in these two organs. And then near the end, you will need to learn or understand the functioning of the placenta. Now, this is the part that gets everybody confused. It's simply 4 different diagrams together. That's what's happening in the uterus. Now, this particular picture shows the whole uterus. Sometimes the pictures will simply show the thickness of the endometrium or lining of the uterus. This is what is happening in the ovary. Those are the ovarian hormone, those are the pituitary hormones, which control the whole cycle, and these are the ovarian hormones, which are the way the ovary communicates with the uterus. We shouldn't have gone on. I just want to talk a little bit about this. Okay, so in these pictures, we have the different stages of what's happening in the ovary. We also have what's happening in the uterus with the menstrual cycle. Here we have the fact that estrogen rises because it's produced by the follicle. And then after ovulation, the estrogen drops and progesterone rises because it is being produced by the corpus luteum. The pituitary hormones actually get this process going. And the one that gets it going is FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, which is what actually gets the follicle started on its development. The other one is LH, and that actually causes ovulation. So you need to understand the relationship between the different hormones and what is happening in the ovary and the uterus. Quite a few of the questions involving this also test your application skills. So your application skills, you have to interpret different diagrams showing hormones and their relationship. Then you also need to know, and I'm sure you will have done in class, how the contraceptive measures. How does contraception work? Because many of the methods are very, very closely tied to the hormonal control of menstruation. Then once fertilization has occurred, you also have to be able to say, okay, well, if a woman is pregnant, how is this going to affect the balance of the different hormones? Then, practical skills. In every exam, there will be some questions which test you on your practical skills. You have to be able to interpret graphs, or you could be given tables, graphs showing how hormones are changing. You have to interpret that. Then you also need to be able to interpret experiments. And for example, if you did the practice questions, one of the practice questions is an experiment on male contraceptives. Now, it describes the experiment to you, and you have to, from the description of the experiment, think, well, what's actually happening here? In experiments, you very often asked simple practical skills, identifying, for example, the independent variable, the dependent variable, the controlled or fixed variables. You also could be asked for a hypothesis, a conclusion. Is this a valid experiment? In other words, this is testing to see or to check your understanding of the experimental process. So some questions will be straight practical skills. Then other questions will actually link back to the work we have done. For example, in this experiment, what do you think is going to happen? Why is that going to happen? In other words, it's testing to see, can you link what you're reading in the experiment to what you have actually done in class, and you can make the link between the theory and the practical work. By now, your brains are probably a bit bursting. So, let's take a break. See you just now. Hello, welcome back from your break. I hope your minds are feeling a bit refreshed. Just a good point. Whenever you take a break from studying or learning or doing practice papers, it's a really good idea to go outside and get some fresh air, because the fresh air can keep your brain functioning. It also gives you a little bit of a chance to do some exercise so that you don't feel as though you're sitting in one spot all the time. And that definitely will enable you to concentrate much, much better when you come back from a break like this. Before we start the last set of questions, just a reminder that you write 2 life sciences exams, and the year's work is divided into 2 halves, and the reproduction is in paper 1, which is the first paper that you're going to be writing. However, the types of questions that are asked are similar in paper 1 and 2. We talked about the recall questions, the understanding questions. There are going to be questions like that in both papers. It's just the topics that you will be asked on are slightly different. Practical skills. There will also be some practical skills question in each one of the exams. So the skills we're doing now will stand you in good stead for both the exams. Now, let's go back and look specifically at human reproduction and see what other types of questions can be asked. So what we're looking at now is specific aim 3, which is looking at life sciences in the world. In other words, it's where you link what you learn in class to the real life world around you. And many questions that you will be asked will be on something that is topical, but you will also have to be able to link what you've done in class, the theory that you have done, and link it to real life situations. So most of these questions in this life science in the world are interpretive questions. The best way to prepare for questions like this is to be aware of what is happening in the world around you. If you hear something about a cure for cancer, new types of medication, in real life, listen to it, be interested in it, find out about it, because very often you get questions on things like that. And the thinking that you are doing when you are hearing about something on the radio or you read something on social media, the thinking that you are doing of linking what is in real life to what is in the classroom, that stands you in good stead for these last couple of types of questions. So, in these last questions, it's very interpretive, and you are very often given passages, you are given pictures, and you are given a little bit about a particular situation. For example, it could be on sexually transmitted diseases and the effects they have. It could be on reproductive problems, and we're going to be looking at an example of this in a short while. You also have to understand the different contraceptive methods and how they work, and also some people struggle to have children, and science has an amazing array of fertility treatments that can help childless couples achieve their aim of having a baby of their own. So you need to understand why some people cannot have children and how doctors and medical science can actually help them to conceive. Let's have a look at this question. This is one of the questions that was in your practice questions, and I hope you actually had a look at it. Okay, because this is a reproductive problem. Sometimes it's a written passage. In this case, it's a diagram, and the diagram shows an embryo that has started to develop in the fallopian tube. And this is called an ectopic pregnancy. Now, very often with a diagram like this, it's linked to simpler questions. For example, you might be asked, give the correct label for part number D. What happens in part number C during your menstrual period? What are the functions of part A? What will happen to part B if the fetus grows very, very large? So in addition to the extra information, it's always linked back to what you have actually done in class. So you seldom find questions that are just theory and just application to real life. They're very, very often all mixed up together. But the good part about that is the more straightforward questions are usually near the beginning. And that helps you in your confidence because you think, oh, well, at least I know the answers to these questions. And by the time you get to the more difficult question on science and society, which is at the end of the question, you will have relaxed a bit and hopefully you will be able to work out the linkage. Sometimes there are straightforward questions starting off with labeling these different parts. But, for example, what is the label of part number 1? But it can then be extended to ask about what is that organ? What are those little things there? How does it work to ensure that the embryo provides? And another very good question is, which part, that part there, or this part here, is most important in getting food to the developing fetus? And most of you would say, oh, it's the umbilical cord. But actually it's not. The umbilical cord can only transport what the placenta has absorbed. So if there's something wrong with the placenta, the development of the baby would be affected. Okay. We also talked about different contraceptive methods. So you could be given any information on contraceptive methods. This is a particular picture of an intrauterine device. You might have a picture of the pill, any other type of contraceptive. You might have a passage on how the effectiveness of different types of contraceptives. But you have to be able to interpret that in terms of what you have done in class. So let's have a look. What this is, obviously, it is the uterus. And again, you can be asked simple questions. What is that part? What is that part? What is this part? What is that part? But the key part for linking science or life science to what is happening in the world is this picture here, because this is a picture of an intrauterine device, and that is the type of contraceptive method that is recommended for women who have had children. And this simply shows how it is inserted. And you need to understand that because it's in position, the embryo would not be able to embed itself. Plus, these bits of plastic give off a hormone which makes the endometrium rubbery. So when an embryo arrives, if it's been fertilized, it will not be able to embed itself in the uterus. And that is how intrauterine devices like this actually work in preventing pregnancy. Now, there's lots of different examples, and the best way for you to work out how to do these difficult application questions is practice. Do as many past papers as you can. The past papers are available on the Education Department website, and the more of those you do, the more used to the different types of questions you get, and the easier it is to answer them. There are memoranda, which is model answers with the correct answers, on the department website as well, that you can access quite freely. As in everything, if you want to do well at something, you have to practice, practice, practice. I hope that this little insight into what is in the exams will help you in your studying. And when you go into the exam, just remember, there will always be something that you can do. So don't get caught up on the things that you look at and worry because it doesn't make sense to you. Focus on what you can do. That will gain your confidence, you will settle down, and then you will be in a better frame of mind to tackle those difficult questions. All I can say is, may you reap what you have sown. In other words, if you have worked hard, may you get good results. I never say good luck, because you know what? Luck doesn't play any part in doing well in an examination. It's the work you put in beforehand. So, happy learning. See you next time.